I am Vladimir Lenin, the Russian revolutionary leader who played a key role in the 1917 October Revolution, which led to the establishment of the Soviet Union. As the first head of the Soviet state, I led the Bolsheviks in overthrowing the provisional government, and I aimed to create a socialist state based on Marxist principles. My leadership greatly shaped the direction of the 20th century and the global spread of communism. Here are some facts about me. I executed the king, his wife and 5 of his children. How can my mother believe in God? A series of strokes turned me into a plant. My brother was executed. All facts are truth. I am ashamed of some things, and some things almost destroyed me. However, it is an integral part of my life. It proves that famous people have the same problems and life challenges as everyone else. Now all about it in more detail. Section 1. My brother was executed. Alexander, Sasha, as we called him. His name is inseparable from my own story, though our paths, in some ways, diverged sharply. His death marked a turning point in my life, one I could not have foreseen and one that shaped my convictions and decisions in ways I am still reckoning with. Sasha was brilliant, deeply intellectual, and principled. As the eldest son, he bore much of the weight of expectation in our family, particularly after the death of our father. He excelled academically, especially in the natural sciences, and it seemed, at first, that he was destined for a respectable, scholarly life. But behind his reserved demeanor was a fire, one fueled by the injustices of the society we lived in and by a growing awareness of the brutality of the autocratic system under which Russia suffered. He was drawn into the revolutionary circles at university, influenced by the writings of men like Nikolai Chernyshevsky and the populists who believed in radical action as a means to overthrow tyranny. By the time he joined the Narodnaya Volya, the people's will, he was fully committed to the cause of dismantling the monarchy. That commitment ultimately led him to the plot to assassinate Tsar Alexander III in 1887. When the authorities discovered the plot, Sasha and his comrades were arrested. I was just 17 at the time, living in Simbirsk with our family. The news hit us like a thunderclap. I remember my mother's anguish, her desperate attempts to plead for Sasha's life. She wrote letter after letter to the authorities, begging for clemency, but it was no use. The Tsar would not be swayed. Sasha was convicted and sentenced to death. Even in his final days, he remained composed, steadfast in his belief that his actions were necessary for the liberation of the Russian people. I later learned that he declined to write a letter of apology to the Tsar, knowing it would not change his fate and refusing to submit to a regime he despised. On May 8, 1887, he was hanged. What can I say about the impact of his death? It devastated our family, especially my mother, whose health and spirit were broken. For me, it was a profound and defining moment. I admired Sasha's courage, his willingness to act in the face of injustice, but I also saw the futility of his sacrifice. His death did not bring about the change he sought, it only tightened the grip of repression. And yet, his example planted a seed in me, a determination to continue the fight, though I would take a different path. I did not embrace the populist methods of Narodnaya Volya. I saw their tactics as ultimately ineffective, their focus on assassinations as short-sighted. Instead, I turned to Marxism, which I saw as offering a more comprehensive framework for understanding and dismantling the structures of oppression. I believed in the power of the proletariat, in the need for mass movements rather than individual acts of terror. Some have suggested that my radicalization was more about personal grief and vengeance than ideological conviction. Perhaps there is some truth to that. Losing Sasha filled me with anger, not just at the Tsarist regime but at the entire system that allowed such injustices to persist. But to reduce my commitment to revolutionary ideals to mere personal vendetta is an oversimplification. Sasha's death was a catalyst, yes, but it was not the sole reason for my beliefs. The inequities of our society, the grinding poverty, the exploitation of the working class, these were the forces that drove me. In the years that followed, I often thought of Sasha. I wondered what he would have made of my choices, my approach. Would he have approved of my dedication to Marxist principles? Or would he have found my methods too detached, too theoretical? I cannot say. What I do know is that his sacrifice was not in vain, at least not to me. It steeled my resolve, reminding me always of what was at stake and of the costs of inaction. Even now, when I think of the revolution, of the struggle that brought us to this point, I see Sasha's shadow in it. His life and death were part of the same struggle, one that began long before either of us and will likely continue long after. If nothing else, I hope his memory serves as a reminder of the sacrifices made in the pursuit of justice and a better world. Section 2. How can my mother believe in God? I am Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, and you know my name, you know what I have done, what I have fought for. I have led revolutions, torn down the old order, and built something that would shape the world for decades. But let me speak of something not often told, something buried beneath the weight of history and power, the story of my family, the story of a mother's love and a son's defiance. My mother, Maria Alexandrovna, she was a deeply religious woman. Her faith ran through her veins like blood. Every prayer, every sermon, every sacred word was a part of her, as natural as breath itself. She believed in a God who guided our lives, who shaped the course of our souls. And she wanted me to share in that belief, to be a son who honored tradition, who knelt before the altar and carried on the legacy of her faith. But I could not. I would not. I was a son born of revolution, of ideas that had no room for a God above. No, I was born with a fire in my belly, not for the divine, but for the people, for the workers and peasants, for the revolution that would burn down the chains of oppression and build something new, something free. A fire that rejected the old, that cast aside the comforting illusions of religion as mere chains for the mind. And so, there began the divide. I remember the words she would speak, her voice quivering with worry, with disbelief. Vladimir, why must you turn away from God? Why must you fight against all that is holy, all that is good? She did not understand me, could not. To her, my atheism was an insult, an offense, a rejection of all that was sacred. To me, her faith was the opium of the masses, a comfort for the weak, a tool of the tyrants to keep the people docile. How could she not see the truth? How could she remain blind to the chains that bound us all, the lies that we accepted as reality? But I was her son, and a mother's love is a difficult thing to break. And yet, I broke it. I broke her heart. I abandoned the hope she had for me, I turned my back on the world she knew, on the world she had tried so desperately to give me. And there, in those silent nights, I could feel her disappointment like a shadow at my back. She never said it, not in so many words, but I saw it in her eyes, in the lines of worry on her face. She feared for my soul, feared what I was becoming, who I was becoming. A man who would give his life to an idea, who would sacrifice family, tradition, everything, in the name of a cause greater than himself. I remember the letters, oh, how she wrote to me, pleading for my return, for me to set aside my radicalism, to abandon my dangerous thoughts, and to be the son she had hoped for. She never understood. She could never understand the urgency, the fire that drove me. What was it to me, then, to see the woman who gave me life, whose heart beat in the same rhythm as my own, weep for the man I had become? In truth, I could not find it in me to forgive her either. For as much as I loved her, there was a deeper loyalty that bound me, the cause. She stood for the old world, the world of weakness and submission, of faith without question. I could not stand with her in that. I could not be a part of that. And so the divide grew wider. The hardest part, perhaps, was not the revolution or the battles or the bloodshed, it was knowing that, in her final days, she never truly understood why I fought. She never knew the depth of my conviction, the reason I had chosen this path. Yet, perhaps there was one thing I could give her, one small comfort in all the conflict that lay between us. I gave her my success. I gave her the revolution that she had hoped for in her own way. And though she never saw it the way I saw it, perhaps in some distant part of her heart, she could take pride in what I had done. But the guilt, it lingers. The guilt of being a son who could not be what she wanted me to be. A son who was willing to tear down the world she loved in order to build one of his own design. A pause. The voice grows quiet, reflective, as if lost in a moment of deep personal thought. Yes, I may have led revolutions and destroyed empires, but there was no victory in this personal war. For in the end, the heart of a mother is a battlefield where even the fiercest of men can fall. The voice grows firmer, resolute again. So I moved forward, with my mother's love as both a burden and a memory. And I never looked back. But perhaps there was no greater revolution than the one within my own heart. Section 3, a series of strokes turned me into a plant. I, Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, once the firebrand, the revolutionary, now, I sit here, broken by the very body that once burned with fire, with passion, with vision. Once, I led masses, I spoke words that rallied millions, and now I am a shadow of that man, a husk. A leader in name alone, for what is a leader without the strength to rise, to move, to act? The revolution, the cause, I gave my life for them. And in return, they have returned to me a body ravaged, a mind that no longer serves me as it once did. It is strange, isn't it? That the same hands that once tore apart empires, that lifted the banner of revolution, should now tremble with weakness. I remember the early days, when I felt invincible. I stood tall against Tsarism, against imperialism, against the old world that had stifled the life of the people. I fought, and I won. But now I am fighting a battle against my own body, a battle I did not choose, a battle I cannot win. A pause, as if reflecting on the toll of the years. It began slowly, you know. The aches. The weariness. They came like silent thieves in the night, taking more from me than I cared to admit. But I was strong, wasn't I? I told myself it was nothing. I pushed on. There was no time to think of the body when the world was burning, when the workers were rising, when the revolution needed a leader. But the body is a cruel thing. It is patient. It waits. And then it strikes. The first stroke. The first blow, a quiet thunder. My right side, weakened. My arm, my leg, no longer obeyed my commands. The mind, sharp as it ever was, screamed in frustration, but the body would not listen. I could not hold the pen as I once did. I could not stand in front of the people as I once did. And then the second, and the third. Each stroke like a chain around my neck, pulling me lower, dragging me away from the world I had built, from the world I still wanted to lead. It is a cruel thing, you know, to be a revolutionary and yet find yourself imprisoned within your own body. To see the world you fought for, the people you fought for, and yet not be able to act, to move. A slight laugh, bitter and resigned. I had once said that a man is nothing without his will. Will, that fierce force that drives us to action, to change. But now I find my will shackled by a body that rebels against me. And with each passing day, I feel myself slipping further from the fight. What good is a revolutionary who cannot lead? What good is a mind sharp as steel when the hands that should carry out its commands are useless? My comrades, they look at me with pity, with concern. And I hate them for it. I hate them because they see what I cannot bear to face. They see a man, once full of life and fury, now turned into a mere fragment of his former self. I am no longer the man who inspired nations. I am no longer the man whose words could set hearts alight. The voice falters, but with a sudden intensity, as if pushing through the haze of weakness. But what is this, if not a test of my strength? What is this, if not a challenge I must overcome? The revolution does not end with the fall of the body. No, it lives on in the minds of the people. And though my body may be breaking, my mind still burns with the fire of that cause. The voice softens, as if pondering the inevitable. But, how long can the fire burn when the fuel is gone? How long can a man lead when the hands that once held the sword now tremble with age? I fear my time has come. The world will move on without me. A deep, heavy breath. A resigned silence follows. The revolution will not wait for me. It never does. But I, Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, will rest knowing I gave everything, everything. Even when my body betrayed me, my soul did not. Even when my strength failed, my vision never wavered. And when the final stroke comes, when the last breath leaves my lungs, the world will carry on. And perhaps, just perhaps, in the hearts of the people, there will remain a spark of what I once was. A soft, almost imperceptible sigh. The voice trails off, lost in the gravity of what has been said. I have lived for the revolution. And if I must die, I die for it too. Section 4. I executed the king, his wife and 5 of his children. The revolution was never meant to be gentle. It was not a dinner party, as the saying goes, but a fundamental restructuring of society, one that required firm action and, at times, harsh decisions. I understood this from the very beginning. Yet, when people speak of repression, of the bloodshed and the difficult choices we made, they often forget the circumstances we faced. They focus on the results, not the reasons, and it is those reasons I wish to explain. By the time the Bolsheviks took power in October 1917, Russia was already in chaos. The provisional government had failed, the war was bleeding the country dry, and the old regime's corruption had left the masses destitute. We came into power in the midst of a civil war that would define the very survival of the revolution. It was a life-or-death struggle, not just for the Bolsheviks, but for the vision of a socialist state itself. One of the most contentious episodes often discussed is the execution of the Romanov family. Let me address it directly. The decision to execute Tsar Nicholas II, his wife, and their children was not taken lightly. By July 1918, the White Army was advancing, and there was a real danger that the Romanovs could become a rallying point for counter-revolutionary forces. We could not afford that risk. The execution in Ekaterinburg was grim, but we believed it was necessary to eliminate any chance of their symbolic return to power. I did not personally order it, communication lines were chaotic, but I understood why it was done. Do I regret the deaths of innocent children? It is not a question of regret but of necessity. History does not forgive hesitation in moments like these. Repression was not limited to the monarchy. The Civil War forced us to act decisively against numerous political opponents, Mensheviks, socialist revolutionaries, and others who opposed Bolshevik rule. The Chayka, the secret police, was established to root out counter-revolutionaries and saboteurs. Some call this repression, I call it defense. In war, especially civil war, no government can afford to be lenient. The stakes were too high. If we had not acted decisively, the revolution would have been crushed, and the old ruling classes would have returned with a vengeance. There were also peasant uprisings, such as the Tambov Rebellion, and strikes like those in Kronstadt. These events are often cited as evidence of our failure to represent the working class and the peasantry. What critics fail to acknowledge is that these uprisings often align themselves with forces intent on undoing the revolution altogether. In Kronstadt, for example, the sailors demanded "Soviets without Bolsheviks," a slogan that would have dismantled the very foundation of the state we were building. The suppression of the Kronstadt rebellion was tragic but necessary. Allowing it to succeed would have fractured the revolution at its most vulnerable point. The Red Terror is another source of condemnation. People speak of the executions, the arrests, and the fear it instilled. Yes, it was brutal. But again, consider the context. We were surrounded by enemies, both internal and external. The Whites, with the support of foreign powers, sought to destroy us. Counter-revolutionaries and spies infiltrated our ranks. Without the Red Terror, we could not have secured the gains of the October Revolution. It was not a choice between terror and peace, it was a choice between terror and defeat. I have been criticized for these actions, and I understand why. To many, they seem harsh, dictatorial even. But the revolution was not a philosophical exercise, it was a battle for survival. If we had failed, the bloodshed would not have ended, it would have multiplied. The white forces and their allies would have crushed the workers and peasants who dared to dream of a new society. The landlords, the capitalists, and the foreign powers would have divided Russia and plunged it into further misery. Do I bear responsibility for these decisions? Of course. I was the leader of the Bolsheviks, the head of the Soviet state, and I made choices that I believed were in the best interest of the revolution. But I reject the notion that these actions were taken out of cruelty or a lust for power. They were taken out of necessity. The revolution was not a tidy process. It was violent because the forces it opposed were entrenched, violent, and unyielding. Some argue that this repression laid the groundwork for what came later, the purges, the gulags, the totalitarianism of Stalin's rule. That may be true to an extent, but to judge my actions by what followed is to conflate two very different periods. My focus was always on securing the revolution, on ensuring that socialism could survive in a hostile world. I did not envision the excesses of the future, nor would I have condoned them. To those who question the morality of our methods, I ask, what would you have done? Would you have allowed the revolution to be destroyed out of a commitment to gentler principles? Would you have surrendered the dream of a workers' state because the means to achieve it were imperfect? These are not rhetorical questions, they are the questions I grappled with every day of my leadership. Repression was not the heart of the revolution, it was its shield. Without it, there would have been no land reform, no workers' rights, no foundation for a socialist future. The path we chose was not easy, nor was it clean, but it was the only path we could take under the circumstances. Let history judge me if it must, but let it judge me fairly, with an understanding of the challenges we faced and the stakes involved.